good songs. David, I thought I put that clicker up here. There it is right there, right where I put it, just like my Bible. The other night I was lost my Bible, and right where I left it is right where I found it. Boy, it's good to be with you this evening. Thank you so much for allowing us to be with you this week. Steve and Amanda, congratulations so much. And I haven't said anything, but I want to say how much I appreciate the work that y'all do. Sunday morning when we got here and Jackie is walking, this is her routine when she goes to a church building. She hadn't been out, is go look at classrooms. And when y'all told her about all the work and great work. We've talked about it all week. We'll probably talk about it going home. And we might try to implement some of those. May call you sometime. But thank you for the work you do. And congratulations. Oh, me. I was telling Jim our grandchildren are 26 and 23. And oh, if we just had one brand new. It's what a wonderful thing. And of course, David and Deborah and Landon, thank you for letting us be with you. I don't say this just because I'm here and David's the preacher, but this is just the truth. He's one of my favorite guys as a preacher. We've got to talk today and well, all week long. And in fact, the hardest thing for me to do, I don't do many meetings, but what sermons do you preach? And I hope this don't disappoint you, but the lesson tonight is I don't know if you need this lesson. You folks have got so much together. You folks have such a good congregation. To the elders, thank you so much for letting us be here and study with you and just get to know you. And to the elders, the deacons, the preachers, the whole congregation, I've seen nothing but good things from you. Jackie and I do get to visit quite a few congregations, not in preaching many gospel meetings, but be in different places. And you meet a lot of people sometimes that's disgruntled. That's just the fact. But I've not heard anything but good this week. From you, David has sang y'all's praises all week long. And I'm going to say this. Sometimes you're not supposed to say what the preacher said, but I'm going to say this. And to the elders, he said, I believe we got the best elders in the brotherhood that a church could have. In 4 congregations that we worked with, there was a lot of time. I had some difficulties with the elders, Carrie. I expected so much, too much. But brethren, I appreciate the leadership, the work. And a preacher doesn't come in just to say this, to boost up the elders. But I honestly mean this. I do. I mean this. But let's look at this lesson tonight. David come over and said, Sonny, I didn't even say anything about you. Well, I'm not going to fuss at him because last night, and I am so embarrassed, we had 2 couples here, dearest friends, some of the dearest friends we have, and I started to say their names, and I got off on, and I never said, they drove an hour to come up here to be with us, to worship, and I didn't say one word. And so I'm not mad at you for not saying it. I'm glad you didn't, because now I can feel maybe a little better. You know, there's preaching lessons and there's teaching lessons. And I think this will be a teaching lesson. You've been good listeners, and I ask you to listen well tonight in our last lesson. A Sunday through meeting just doesn't go long, does it? Sunday through Wednesday meeting just doesn't last long. Time you get started, you're through. Now, I know some of you are saying, whoo, boy, I'm glad it's been a whole half a week. I'm glad this thing's over. But Jackie and I have enjoyed it. We've enjoyed it. How to have a healthy church. You know, there's a word, Titus in our English Bibles uses this word. The word sound. To have a sound church, to have a sound preacher, to have a sound eldership. And sometimes we use that word sound in a way that I'm not crazy about. I was talking to David the other day, and I said, sometimes we use the word sound in this sense. Well, if you agree with me, then you're a sound guy, but if you don't agree with me, you're not very sound. But that word sound doctrine, Timothy writes to Titus about it, is really a wonderful word. It just literally means healthy. And so I don't say sound a whole lot. I like to say healthy. To be healthy, a church has got to be a healthy church. We all have our weaknesses. We all have our shortcomings. We all have sometimes our immaturities, a whole lot of things. But the church has just got to be healthy. And this is what we're going to look at tonight. Now, several years ago, a bunch of years ago, I don't remember exactly when, I would get on the internet and look up websites of congregations and read their mission statements and just read about the church. And I found this, and I thought, man, that's good stuff right there. Could I ever preach that? I hope we can. I hope I can tonight. Churches grow warmer through fellowship. Churches grow deeper through discipleship. Churches grow stronger through worship. Churches grow broader. This has been a broad week for me. I've eaten an awful lot. I ate a half a watermelon today, right after I ate lunch. Churches grow broader through ministry, and churches grow larger through evangelism. Let's begin with this first one, and mostly up here, just going to have some scriptures tonight. The church grows warmer through fellowship. You ever been in a cold church? Now, my wife, every church building we walk in is cold, but that's not what we're talking about. I do have a congregation in Florence years ago, and we visited there, and I was talking to these folks, and this guy said, "You know what, Sonny, we have two churches here." I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, we got a right side church and a left side church." Now, here's what he said. I didn't go into this to find out, but he said, nobody on the right side speaks to anybody on the left side, and vice versa. That's a cold church. I've certainly not seen that or even thought about seeing that. But a church grows warmer through fellowship. They continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine, fellowship, the breaking of bread, and in prayers. The church is brand new. And when I say brand new, I mean brand new. Judaism is still strong. Judaism is still the religion of the day, for sure. We know that. But boy, there's a brand new fellowship. You remember what many called the church, the fellowship of the church? People of the way. That's mentioned several times in the book of Acts. People of the way, the people that's of the way of Jesus. A church grows warmer through fellowship. They continue steadfastly. In verse 46, chapter 2, 46, so continuing daily with one accord in the temple, breaking bread from house to house, they ate their food with gladness and simplicity of heart. They loved getting together. You see, the first century church enjoyed eating as much as we enjoy eating. I guess that's where we got it from. But isn't it interesting that the church had fellowship every single day? The word fellowship just simply means partnership or communion. One writer said this: fellowship indicates a community of people working together for the good of a common cause. The church is a community of people. And that's what you are, a community of people that have fellowship. In chapter 4 and verse 32, the Bible says, "Now the multitude of those who believed were of one heart and one soul. They had all things in common." I don't know if the church today is there like they were. But boy, can't we strive to be the multitude of those who believed. Now, at this time in Jerusalem, the church had been established. There could be 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 people in the church at Jerusalem. And they had one heart. They had one soul. and they had things in common. Even more important, the non-believers saw the community of the people working together. These two passages here, 1 chapter 2 and verse 47, praising God and having favor with all the people, and the Lord added to the church daily those that were being saved. Praising God and having favor with all the people. I don't think that means all the people just always like the church, because we know the Romans and many of the Gentiles didn't like the church. The Jews didn't like the church. But they were such a community of believers within themselves that they had favor with the people. The church had fellowship, a community of believers, as I've mentioned. In Acts chapter 8 and verse 4, and we'll look at this passage again later, but it says those who were scattered, they went everywhere preaching the word. When this great persecution come upon the church, and the apostles stayed in Jerusalem, the rest of the church moved on. And what happened? They preached. They just taught other people. Church, that's who we've got to be, is a community of people that teaches other people. Chapter 17 and verse 6, those who turn the world upside down have come here too. You know, we need to be the kind of people and have the kind of fellowship that the people in Dennis, Mississippi, and say, man, those folks are turning our world upside down. Really what we're doing is turning it right side up. But that's how people should look at us, as being so close and knit together. We'll talk about that knit together in just a little while. The church grows warmer through fellowship. Romans chapter 12 and verse 16, the Bible tells us there, be of the same mind toward one another. Now I want you to explore something with me. To be of the same mind with one another. In 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 10, the Bible says this, and brethren, we've argued about this passage sometimes. We look at this passage sometimes and say, well, we can't be that way. Well, you know, the world won't let us. He says, now I plead with you, brethren, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that you all speak the same thing. There be no divisions among you, but that you be perfectly joined together in the same mind and in the same judgment. And somebody might say, well, that's just impossible. Turn your Bibles to Ephesians chapter 4. Ephesians chapter 4, we see that Paul entertains this idea again about being of the same mind, being of the same judgment. Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 16, Paul says, from whom the whole body, joint and knit together by what every joint supplies, according to the effective working by which every part does its share, and it causes growth of the body. Same idea as this right here, that we're knit and joined together. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, Paul gives this illustration of the body, the physical body, and how the physical body's to work together. And that the eye can't say to something else, I have no need of you, but we know every part does. Man, I was in the 9th grade, started to say 8th grade, 9th grade. And I woke up one morning, I was hurting, I was crying, I was hurting terribly. I went and woke my mom up and I said, Mom, I'm sick. Took me to the doctor, and man, my appendix were about to rupture. And I've learned that those things don't really do much, but I'll tell you one thing they do. They hurt when it doesn't work. It's part of my body. If something doesn't work in my body, my whole body's affected by it. When I was a boy in high school and I was trying to run track, Gary, as a coach, you'll like this. We had 4 people in a heat. I never come in better than 4th in any race I ever run. My nickname was Turtle, so I couldn't run very fast, but I could run all day long. But I was at Deschler one day, and some of you folks that might have been around that time, there was a young man that went to Deschler, and he was always there at all the track meets. But when this young man walked, his body was just all over the place. He had cerebral palsy. And I'll never forget a guy named Johnny McDonald, one of the great football players. I should have went to Alabama, but he went to Auburn. And he was on the track team and tremendous. And I would go there in the 8th grade. I'd go watch this guy run. He'd run the hurdles. He was a big guy, but he'd run the hurdles. And then I would see this young man. I didn't understand it. How does one part of the body work so well for one guy and then the body don't work at all for another guy? I don't know the answer to that, but I do know in the church. I do know in the church all the bodies got to work together. Whatever you are, whoever you are in the church, whatever God's called you to be, called you to do it. That the body can work together. That's the only way it's going to work. That's the only way we're going to really be a community of believers, is that we work together. Be of the same mind and of the same judgment. The church grows deeper through discipleship. Does discipleship come hard for you? Sometimes it comes pretty hard for me. I'm not a real disciplined person. I've not disciplined myself in my eating. I don't discipline myself in exercise. I discipline myself in sitting down a lot. I discipline myself pretty good in reading and doing a lot of things like this. But the church grows deeper through discipleship. What is a disciple? The word just literally means that a disciple is a learner. One who follows another's teaching. The apostles and many others, they called a lot of people disciples, but especially the apostles, they followed Jesus. They were disciples of Jesus Christ. One writer said this, I like it, a disciple is not only a learner, but an inherent learner. They're spoken of as imitators of their teachers. Jesus himself said a disciple is to be like his teacher. He's not above his teacher, but everyone who is perfectly trained, that means completely trained, will be like his teacher, a disciple. What kind of a disciple are you of Jesus? What kind of a disciple are you in the Liberty Church of Christ? Are you considered a disciple, a good disciple? Have you disciplined yourself to work within God's church? To be Christ's disciple is to strive to be like him. According to the Apostle Paul, someone else wrote this agrees with God's goal of the redemption of mankind, that they may be conformed to the image of his Son, for whom he foreknew a long time ago. God knew he was going to have disciples. He also predestined, he planned for us to be conformed to the image of his Son. If we're going to be conformed to the image of his Son, Jesus Christ, we've got to be disciples. Y'all have probably heard this. Y'all might have known this person. I've always heard years ago at Freed Hardeman, there was a teacher that was so well loved, and he wore a hat, and he walked with a cane that often many of the students would wear a hat and walk with a cane. I told you the other night that my mentor, the guy that helped me more than anybody ever could have helped me, that sometimes people tell me when they hear me preach, they hear him preach. I'm okay with being a disciple of his. I'm okay that he's my mentor. And boy, I'd like to be like him. I really would. But we must be conformed to Jesus Christ. Discipleship is practicing discipline as a Christian. This is my favorite one of all. The church grows stronger through worship. In 2006, I had a first knee replacement. In 2010, I got a staph infection. They put me on an antibiotic that just liked to kill me. It just didn't work. And I kept going to church and preaching every Sunday, and the elders come to me one Sunday, and they said, Sonny, don't come back to church. Go home, lay in the bed, and get well, and quit getting up and trying to do something. I know there was 3 months I didn't go to church. Most horrible time in my life. I had pity parties and times I didn't even want to live because I couldn't go to church because I love worship. I loved watching my grandson play baseball. That was Jack and I's absolute favorite thing in the world, except going to church. We never missed church when our grandson would play an all-star game. We might get there late. I don't mind telling you, worship in the assembly with the church is the absolute greatest honor and privilege that God has ever given me in my whole life. Jackie knows I love her and knows I love our family and our children and many others. But brethren, to me, there's not anything on the face of the earth like being in the assembly of God's church. The church grows stronger through worship. In Psalm 18, now let me say, I meant to say this before I put that up there. In the New Testament, we learn how to worship, the practice of worship. To eat the Lord's Supper, to sing, to give, to pray. We learn the plan of worship. But in the Psalms, we learn how to worship, how to pour our heart out to God, how to give ourselves. I will love you, O Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, my deliverer, my God, my strength in whom I'll trust, my shield and the horn of my salvation. He says, my stronghold. I love you, God. In Psalm 46, in verses 1 through 3, the psalmist writes and said, you're my rock. You're my rock. You're for me in times of trouble. And then you get out into verse 10 of Psalm 46. It says, be still and know that I am God. I love to come to the assembly on Sunday morning and just be still and know that my God is the God of heaven. We come together in His name to worship. But allow me to say this. Isn't it amazing that in worship is often to where we divide ourselves? In a sense, our whole Christian life, we've worked with young people. I have fallen in love with what some call the new songs. I have always been in love with what we call the old songs, always. I'm not afraid to say I've probably been to as many or more youth rallies than anybody on the face of the earth. We worked with Challenge Youth Conference 25 years. We've worked with Titus Camp 19 years. And we understand not just the worship, but the emotion of worship. Now, I don't like folks when they jump over pews and they scream and holler. That's not worship. But boy, to come in and reverence God and to come in and devote ourselves to God, that He is the horn of my salvation. He's my stronghold. Worship, we become stronger. When we miss worship, we begin to grow a little weaker. One of the most times I was ashamed of myself in 2010, when I hadn't been to worship, all of a sudden one Wednesday night about church time, I couldn't be there, but I forgot it was even Wednesday. I hadn't been to church, and so I'd forgot it was even Wednesday. I hated that feeling. I couldn't stand that feeling because I wanted to worship God, because the church grows stronger through worship, corporate worship. Being together, enjoying worship. A church that worships together stays together. And I believe that. A church that worships together stays together. In Florence, in the shows area years ago, there was always, we called them worship wars. The older folks didn't like the new songs, and younger folks didn't like the older songs, and we would kind of have war about it. Brethren, that's just not right. And if you're a young person, love these songs. But if you're an older person, learn to love their songs. Learn to praise God. Some of their songs come absolutely straight out of the Psalms. And I just said something inaccurate. Their songs. It's not their songs. It's a church's songs. It's all of our songs. I love this passage. Behold how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. I've seen that this week. I feel in you to dwell together in unity. Only one time have we been in a real difficult situation with a congregation where the unity was just totally lost. And it was a hard time. It was a terrible time. Maybe some of you, maybe somewhere in the history of this church it's happened. I don't know. I hadn't asked David that question. But brethren, it's such a wonderful thing for brethren to dwell together in unity. And notice what I didn't say, that we have to agree with everything everybody says. My mentor, a guy I've been talking about all week, there were several things I didn't agree with him at all. And there were things he didn't agree with me, but not one time did anything come to where words were said or things happened. But brethren, we must dwell together in unity. And I want you to see this passage because this is so true. In John chapter 13, verse 1, Jesus said he loved the disciples. He loved them to the end. We know he washed their feet. And he talked about that they should do the same thing, that they should love one another. And by this all will know that you're my disciples if you have love one for another. The thing that kills church, the thing that can kill a church is when we lose fellowship, we lose the discipleship of one another. We lose in worship, that we don't worship together. The world just looks at us. Several years ago, I went to IBC with a man. He was a Marine drill sergeant, a black gentleman, and boy, he was just sharp as a tack. We was in practice preaching one day, and I've never been much on shoes, and in practice preaching, I got up and I delivered my 10-minute sermon, and everybody said, "Oh, good sermon, Sonny, good sermon." It come to Herman, and Herman said, "Sonny, them the ugliest shoes I ever seen in my life. You ought not ever wear them shoes to church." But this man, he was a good man. He went off and he worked for a church, and he got into a pyramid scheme. If I said that correctly, a pyramid scheme, I think that's what they called it. And he didn't really understand what happened, and he was taken to court. And he pleaded guilty. He tried to do everything to clear it up, but his lawyer, he had a lawyer. And one day his lawyer asked him this question: "Why are all these people coming down here to see you every day?" He said, "That's my church family." He said, "They're coming here to help me along. I've repented of what things that's happened. They understand, they believe that I really didn't mean to be in what I was in. I didn't know what I was doing." He said, "I've never seen people support someone else like they've supported you." It wasn't all a black church. It was a mixed church, white folks, black folks, everybody coming in. And he sat down and talked to this lawyer, and he was baptized. His wife was baptized. And this was the only reason the gospel was preached to him, that the church loved one another in a tremendous way. And we've got to grow stronger in our worship. We've got to love one another in our worship. We've got to support one another in our church. So far, churches grow warmer through fellowship, deeper through discipleship, stronger through worship. They grow warmer, deeper, and stronger. How's the Liberty Church? How's the Liberty Church in these areas right here? Well, number 4. Fat preacher should never preach on this, but the church grows broader through ministry. I've grown a little broader this week. I know I've probably gained a few pounds. But what do I mean by growing broader through ministry? Acts chapter 8 and verse 4, I said we'd come to this passage. "Therefore, those who were scattered went everywhere. They were preaching the word, and they were growing broader through their ministry. They were spreading out, because every time someone talked to someone else, the church grew a little more." Brethren, are we growing broader in that we're sharing the gospel with others? Are we growing broader that others are hearing God's message through us, and that we have that great fellowship and that strong discipleship, that corporate worship where we're together? Are we growing broader? Are we growing broader through ministry? What is ministry? I think you'll understand this and won't mind me saying it. In the churches of Christ, we've come to a point we've got to have our preacher. We might not call him a pastor, but sometimes that's what we look upon him as, to be the one that goes out and does it all. Maybe that's the one thing in ministry that we've had that I just sometimes didn't like about ministry. When someone would say to me, well, preacher, you're the one that needs to go out and talk to them. But when the church does it, the church grows broader. We spread out and we reach more people. We talk to more people. We love more people. And more people come to Jesus Christ. But boy, here's the crux of the matter. The church grows larger through evangelism. David and I sat down and talked some today. Maybe it was yesterday. I believe it was today. About evangelism. We don't have different ideas on evangelism, but we do evangelism different. You see, not everybody has to be one that does it this way. I love knocking on doors. I don't do it like I used to, but I love knocking on doors. I love meeting people through that way. And everywhere we've been, I've met people that heard the gospel. They were saved from their sins from somebody knocking on their door. But that's not the only way. In fact, that's not even the best way. The best way is just to always be sharing the gospel with someone, teaching someone, finding an opportunity. But I want to tell you something. The church will not grow if there's not evangelism. There's only one way a congregation grows larger, and it's through new birth. Now, if you've ever been to Florence, Alabama, and there's some folks here from Florence, Alabama, I think, and in Florence, Alabama, we call what we swell. One church might swell for 6 or 8 months, then a lot of folks will go over to another church and they'll swell for 6 or 8 months. That's not church growth. That's not always bad, but it's not church growth. The only way the church grows is when someone is born again, when someone is restored back into the fold of God through evangelism. And preachers like me have made evangelism sound hard and laborious, burdensome. And I shouldn't have ever done that. We shouldn't have ever done that. If with church, if we can just understand that our role and our call in life is to share the gospel with someone else. And the way that you know how. When I first started getting involved in evangelism, man, I just thought I had to do it perfect, and I could never do it perfect. So I went and bought a chart. The chart was called A Few Minutes with Someone Who Loves You. And I thought, man, this is the greatest evangelistic tool I've ever seen in my life. And the first Bible study I had, and what happens, you turn it over and they see there, and I'm reading on what it says on the back. And I'm reading just like reading off of a can of potatoes or beans or something, exactly the ingredients. And this lady looked around and she said, you know, I thought you was just reading what you was saying. That's what you was doing. You don't have no heart in that. You're just reading something off a piece of paper. Evangelism's not hard. You know what evangelism is? It becomes natural just to say something to somebody. You know what evangelism is in our world, maybe the best evangelism? Hey, would you like to go to church with me Sunday? That's the most tremendous evangelism there. Would you like to go to church with me? Hey, would you mind if I come over and talk to you? Remember I told you a guy named the same name as me, Sonny, came over and began to show us the Joe Miller film strips. I didn't tell you that the first time he come, he brought somebody with him because he'd never done it before. He didn't know how to do it. He could put the radio on, he could click it, but he didn't know what to say. He was nervous as a cat. And he brought another guy over. You know what his name was? His name was Sonny. 3 Sonnies there studying the Bible together. And this guy could talk and this guy couldn't talk. But it was this guy that came over that led us to the Lord. Hey, Sonny, would you go to church with us Sunday morning? He called us every Sunday morning at 7 o'clock. It got annoying. We went to church with him 3 times. 3 times we went to church with him. And then he quit calling. I guess then I got nervous. And I began to wonder. And boy, one Tuesday night at work, my heart swelled up so much I thought it was going to burst. And all of a sudden I knew I had to do something. Who do you think I went to? Well, I went to that guy named Sonny. I said, man, I got to do something. He said, well, why don't you just meet me at the church building in the morning about 9 o'clock? And again, he didn't know what to say, but he had his preacher over there. And his preacher baptized me into Christ about 9:30 on January the 8th, 1975, the Glendale Church building. And the preacher, after he baptized me, he said, Sonny, I hope you'll make a good Christian. And I said, the only thing I knew to say was the best thing I ever said. I said, I'll try. I didn't know nothing else to say. I'll try. Church, we've got to be involved in evangelism in some way in our life. 1 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse 6, Paul said, I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. And you know, that's exactly the way it is. So then neither he who plants is anything, nor he who waters, but he who gives the increase. Now he who plants and he who waters are one, and each one will receive his own reward according to his own labor. We've just got to plant, and we've got to water. When I was preaching to the Mount Zion congregation, I met a family. I did their wedding ceremony, got to know them. They got to come into church. The girl, she was a member of the Churches of Christ. The guy, he wasn't. He looked like Grizzly Adams. He looked mean. He was from Collinwood, Tennessee, and he was from back in the country, and he just looked mean. He didn't smile much, and they invited us over one night for supper, and we went in. We were eating supper, and he and I went out and talked, and I started putting the pressure on him, and he stopped me real quick. He stopped me real quick. He didn't want to hear none of it. Well, we left that church. Brad McKinnon, someone here mentioned Brad McKinnon. Brad McKinnon come in after me, met this old boy, taught him, and baptized him. And one day when we was at the Petersville church, he walks into the office and says, Sonny, I want to tell you something. He said, I almost whipped you out there that day. And he could have, there's no question. He said, I almost whipped you out there that day. But he said, you know what? You was right. You planted a seed. I didn't like it at first, but you planted a seed. He said, Brad McKinnon come in and taught me the gospel. And I've obeyed the gospel. And if I remember correctly, he come and thanked me before he even thanked Brad. He said, you know, you planted the seed. Brethren, wouldn't it be wonderful just to plant some seeds, just to put a thought in someone's heart that they could be saved? You know, we have a lot of people in our world that's having difficult times, and they truly are. There's people all over the world that's just having difficult times. And somebody can plant a seed, and they might become Christians. I was at Heritage Christian one day. Brother Jerry Davison, you remember Brother Jerry Davison? I was sitting at the table with him. I'd graduated. I was just visiting. There was a young student in front of him. And he said, Brother Davison, how can I grow the church? And Brother Davison said this to him. He said, son, you can't grow the church. He didn't say it ugly, but he said, son, you can't grow the church. You can plant. Someone else can water it. God will give the increase. He said, now don't quit planting. Don't quit watering, but you can't grow the church. Only God can grow the church. But how does He grow the church? Through us. I don't always like the word evangelism because we're scared of it. We don't understand it. People like me's made it hard for other people. But it's how we share the message, spread the message. That's all the word means. Church, I've seen all these things in you this week, and I applaud you for them. And after I got to thinking, I thought, I really don't need to try to preach or teach this sermon because y'all got this down. And I believe you do. But let's do it a little better. This Sunday, I challenge you this Sunday just to invite someone to come with you. All throughout our world, there's people that's struggling. David introduced me to some really great guys this week that I got to just sit down and listen to them. And these guys are struggling in life. Man, they're struggling. But they're looking for answers. Everywhere we go, people are looking for answers about what can we do? How can we be a Christian? How can we become a Christian? How can we serve the Lord? How can we get off alcohol? How can we get out of these drugs? Everyone is looking for something. I'm a firm believer. I cannot prove this to you, but I'm a firm believer that God has put it within everyone to love Him and to serve Him. But yet He gives us the choice. What's your choice? What's your choice to try to help people to come to Jesus Christ? Boy, you're a good congregation. David, I didn't tell you this, and I didn't tell y'all this. I preached at Chapel Hill one Sunday. There's a little guy there. He's kind of got a long, flat top. He works with mules and stuff. You probably know his name. He asked me, he said, this is right after late last year, not this year, late last year, and he said, hey, Sonny, you know David Conley? I said, man, yeah, I know David, great guy. I said, I'm going to be preaching a meeting for him this next year. I don't think he meant it how he said it, but he might have. He said, man, they only bring good preachers in there. And I thought, oh, me, I'm going to mess the whole thing up. But I've learned this. You're a good church. You got good leadership. You got good deacons. You got good ministers. You got good families. And you're good people. We just need to do one thing, just one thing a little bit better. And that's just grow stronger, be more disciplined. But all in all, we just need to be a little bit more evangelistic. Just say, hey, let's go to church. Let's just open the Bible and talk about it. Did you know people like to study the Bible? People really like to study the Bible. And we don't have to agree on everything, but we have to try to bring everybody to the agreement of God. Is there anyone here tonight that's not a Christian yet? Could I talk to you tonight if you are? Could we sit down and just talk a little bit? Is there anybody in here tonight and it's Wednesday night, you're here, I understand that, and I'm picking on the cream of the crop. But is anyone tonight that just needs to sit down and talk about, hey, I need to do a little better. I need to be restored. Is there anyone here tonight that just needs the prayers of the church? Brethren, friends, if you need anything at all, we have an invitation song we're going to sing. And if there's any need in your life, would you please come as we stand and sing?
What can wash
away my sin? Nothing but the blood of Jesus.
What can make